Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another season of Full Press NFL Weekly. That's right, we're going to settle on that name, and we're going to roll with that because, you know what, that vibes with everything else we're doing over here at Full Press Coverage and, of course, Full Press Hockey. But, of course, it is July 31st, it is August Eve, and training camps, NFL training camps, are in full swing. Guys, welcome back. I don't know about you, but I woke up the other day, and it just felt like football season. Just all of a sudden, it was football season. And you know what? I don't think there's any turning back now.
Well, I mean, you can tell from the hat I'm Canadian, right? So for me, like
the CFL has been going for a while.
Yeah, there's about a month and a half of football season, but yeah, NFL does seem like it's right here. Redraft season for fantasy football, especially. So, of course, as the co-host of the Full Press Fantasy Pod, I'm always going to try and take that angle. But happy to be here, Ian. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's there's nothing like overreactions to training camp videos and team and fan base having hope. So it's nice to kind of we have one conference that seems like it's anybody's game. Some Cinderella stories on the other side. So nothing like the NFL. Can't wait for it to get started.
Yeah, we have the Hall of Fame game coming up next week. The Hall of Fame induction next weekend as well, and then we are full bore into the preseason. And thankfully, because quite honestly, I'm getting tired of talking about the same things over and over again. Free agency ended essentially. The rush of free agency ended a long time ago, and everything else has been kind of pretty dormant for the most part. Save for maybe the Baker Mayfield trade. Then, of course, some quarterback contracts. And that's kind of where we're going to start here today because, look, I mean, this offseason, there's been a few themes. There's been a lot of big wide receiver trades. That's something we're going to get into a little bit later. But most importantly, there have been a lot of big quarterback contracts handed out. And most recently was Kyler Murray and his much talked about contract. Now, we're not going to spend too much time on the homework clause that he had. I mean, that's been talked to death and, of course, resolved from a team standpoint. But he's just one of several quarterbacks now that average over $40 million per season, or will when his extension kicks in. It feels like just a few months ago we were talking about how not outrageous, but how much Kansas City might ultimately regret giving Patrick Mahomes $40 million. Well, I think a lot of us have done an about face on that whole stance because his contract looks a whole hell of a lot better compared to some of the ones given to some of the quarterbacks on this list. And Braden, I'll give you the floor because, of course, I think you were saying at the beginning that, the contract's not too bad, just, based on where this is going. Patrick Mahomes, I mean, of all those players, I mean, he has to have the best contract out of all of them, money and skill-wise.
Yeah, and I think it's just kind of knowing how much team and, knowing that the salary cap's going to kind of keep increasing, probably better for Kansas City. And they were kind of in the mix at that same time with the whole Dak Prescott was going on at the same time. So I believe they got his done before Dax was done. Equal one that's not going to probably ever be matched in terms of term and salary. But I think for Patrick Mahomes, it was kind of perfect timing for him. He's kind of evolving and changing heading into 2022. Kind of getting a new core. They're going to have kind of that freedom with the salary cap increasing and other guys, big money down the line. Patrick Mahomes really won't maybe be looked at as he kind of tearing his team down or tying them down. Once all these deals kick in, you talk about the skill wise, and you talk about, I think, just his age and youth. It was, I think, for Kansas City at the time.
Well, you can also, and once I'll let you go here in just a second, Kyle, you can also add in the fact that probably no quarterback on that list, even Josh Allen, is guaranteed, or you can essentially guarantee a certain level of performance like you do with Patrick Mahomes. All those other quarterbacks, you're gambling a bit on what you anticipate on seeing from them. Josh Allen included, because I think he's still on the rise, and I think he's becoming one of those elite quarterbacks. But we need to see it every single year, and I think this is the year he takes the leap. So, Kyle, I'll ask you, which whether it's Patrick Mahomes or a different contract, which one do you think is ultimately going to pay off better for any of these teams?
Well, just because of the length of Mahomes' contract, right? They've got him locked up until the end of the 2031 season. And I'm sure even right away, Braden, when this was signed, you said that like it'll never even get to that far. Like by 2028, 2029, they'll already be working on an extension to kind of replace the massive cap hits those years and get them extended further. But it does seem like the fact that they have the longest stretch without having to worry about it, I think is what is the key here. Now, I agree with you to a certain extent, Ian, about Josh Allen still being somewhat of a risk compared to Mahomes, but at least his average contract is less than Mahomes, and they've got him until I think the 2028 season. So they've also got a bit of locked-in stability. So while I think I would still probably side with you guys and say Mahomes is the best looking contract out of those, I think that the following question of which team will regret it the most, I don't think it's the Bills. I think they're probably pretty happy still with what they're doing with Allen's contract. Again, and that'll compare to some of the others that exist right now.
Yeah, and look, I mean, there's levels to teams that could regret the contracts that they handed out, from performance to just outside reasons. And we learned not too long ago. We're recording this, or we're live right now here on Sunday night, but we heard early Sunday evening that a decision on Deshaun Watson, a suspension, should be coming down tomorrow, which doesn't necessarily mean that the case is done and closed, because there could be an appeal. There could be certain things that delay the suspension, but at least there'll be a hard line number that we can work on as opposed to guessing. And, if you would have asked me a couple months ago or a couple weeks ago or whenever, shortly after the Browns completed the trade, I would have said that they probably are guaranteed to regret the move as much, because not only do they give the fully guaranteed contract, but they had to give up the draft capital. That was under the assumption that a baseline full season suspension was absolutely the minimum that Deshaun Watson was going to get. I don't think I hate to say it, but I feel like it's not going to be a season long suspension. So in which case, the Browns are, I mean, it's still a gamble because he hasn't played in a year and a half. And, I don't think he is at that elite level yet. So there is certainly a talent gamble. But I would say that, honestly, Arizona is probably going to regret the contract that they just gave Kyler Murray, because, first of all, I don't think Arizona has any clue what the hell they're doing from a team management standpoint. I don't know if they have a plan, if they or what is it. I don't know if there's some curse with Cliff Kingsbury in that he can't win games after the midway point, going back to his college days. It's just for some reason that trend has translated to the NFL. And quite frankly, I like Kyler Murray. I don't know if he's a guy that is going to win elevate your team to a Super Bowl caliber team. And maybe you guys can convince me that I'm wrong here, but do you guys disagree that Arizona might regret this the most?
Agree, and I think you kind of talk about the Super Bowl factor. I think he kind of is somebody that had certain parts of the team, I think, filled with the upper elite. The defense, I think the pass rush is the biggest thing that kind of helped them with their early start last year. And I think you just look at where they're at this season. No DeAndre James, and I don't know if you guys have looked at their schedule. Their first three is the Chiefs, the Raiders, and always thinking about this slow or this bad finish for them, but a slow start I think could be. So even though the extension might not kick in right away, I think the pressure and everything surrounding it, and just I think kind of the awkwardness with how this whole off season, I think it's maybe going to get things kind of rolling earlier and maybe put a little bit too much of pressure, I think, on Kyler to from his game. I think he's going to have to elevate himself kind of right away and take a quickly than maybe some of the other guys that are in the same boat as him right now.
I think the one thing about the one thing about the Kyler Murray contract is the way it's structured as well. So next year's not so bad. His cap hit in 2023 is only $16 million. So these next 2 years, they've kind of got a good window where his contract is cheap, but then it explodes to $51.8 million cap hit in 2024. And it's funny because by then you'd expect, okay, it's going to escalate as the salary cap escalates, but then his cap hit goes down in 2025, and then it's almost like a roller coaster. So to almost to your credit, Ian, of even the way they've structured the contract almost doesn't make sense, right? So like the details with Arizona, Steve Keim, what a great GM. I mean, he can fleece Bill O'Brien, but I'm sure every GM that's not named Mike Milbury could probably fleece Bill O'Brien. And they don't even have to be playing the same sport necessarily. But I think so. The way it's structured is strange, and it might limit their ability, let's say in 2024, to track big free agents contracts or extend any players they need to in that season. Whereas, compared to say, we'll compare to Josh Allen, right? We're saying, okay, they might regret that compared to the Chiefs, but still not as much as the Cardinals. So the 2024 cap hit for Josh Allen's only $41 million, so $10 million less than what the Cardinals have. And then it escalates a little bit there, but it's also by 2025 they're also anticipating further and further escalation of the salary cap. So as the cap moves up, you don't mind those contracts getting more and more expensive, a la the Mahomes contract. I think with Murray, it's the pressure is not just on Kyler, but on the entire team to win in the next 2 years. It seems like they've kind of almost set themselves up with a 2-year window, and the timing of it, right? They would have had an extra year next year this year still on a rookie contract, which, I mean, his cap hit this year is $12.7 million. So it basically would kind of equate to they're already going to pay him that. So, but it's instead of maybe starting this window in 23 and then moving forward and having at least a 3-year window, now you've really solidified it to you have to win in the next 2 years, and they have yet to win a playoff game. So.
Well, and that's what, that's kind of what I'm feeling is like, okay, you have 2 years. And I'm like, even in I think going into the season, I think we can agree that the AFC is probably deeper, at least on paper. And of course, I mean, these things can change a month into the season. We're going to sit there and say, why did we think the AFC was deeper? But right now, the assumption is the AFC is the deeper conference. But even in the quote unquote weaker conference, I don't see it as, I give it a 0% possibility that the Cardinals can make a run to the Super Bowl. I just don't think I just don't see how they compete. Not necessarily, not even in that division, but just in the NFL in general. Like going up against the Buccaneers, no. Packers, no. You know what I mean? Like I don't see that type of, the Rams certainly not. No.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know.
In that sense, it's tough to see anyone but those 3 teams make a run at the Super Bowl.
Well, and I can't.
So you almost give it what do you give it, like a 0.5% for the rest of the conference basically each. So you might accelerate to a full percent for teams like the Cardinals.
I think different teams have different ceilings. I just don't see a lot of potential in Arizona. Like I said, I'm concerned. Like I look at Cliff Kingsbury as a coach.
Mm-hmm.
I look at Kyler Murray, and I think he's a fine athlete. He's a fine quarterback, but fine quarterbacks don't win Super Bowls. Elite quarterbacks do. And those are the type of guys that you can count on for an entire playoff run. And maybe it's just the last thing I saw, but the last thing I saw was an abysmal performance in the playoffs after a injury / inconsistent second half of the season from both player and team. So that's why I think 2-year window, I don't see a pass, certainly not this season. Maybe you can change my mind next year, but that's a pretty tight target.
Well, to your credit with the coaching, this would make sense if they fired Kingsbury. If you give yourself 2 years with a new head coach that you think could do it. But now you're already saying you're committing to Kingsbury. Kingsbury. I don't even know. I don't like him enough to even know.
It doesn't matter. He hasn't earned that yet.
He's fallen off the cliff completely for me. But like if you'd want 2 years to install that new system with that new coach. Now you're saying, okay, 1 year with Kingsbury, and then you have to kind of if you do fire Kingsbury, and there's no even guarantee of that, but let's say that's almost the best case scenario at this point for the Cardinals, and you get an improvement at head coach next year, you put so much pressure with the way Kyler Murray's contract is structured to do it year one. Now I will say Deshaun Watson's contract, like it goes up to $50 million cap hits next year, but it stays pretty consistent. So at least the Browns kind of know what they're working with. This team's also won a playoff game without Watson. So assuming they seem like they're ready to compete next year, assuming Watson is full, like all this talk of suspension, whatever, it seems like whatever's about to be decided is going to be decided now. So they'll know with clarity right from the get-go of 2023, probably ready to compete. So having a $50 million cap hit on a quarterback, you better be going for it. Right? Whereas with the Cardinals starting in that 2024 season, really tough to see it even then.
And look, quite frankly, I'm not a one of these, Deshaun Watson is, the next big thing in the NFL. But I think he's better than Kyler Murray. So I think just ability wise, I think,
I feel like 2 years ago, we were talking about Deshaun Watson as already being a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. And I mean, maybe a couple of guys like Josh Allen's really elevated to maybe get there, but I don't think he's like dropped out of that necessarily. No, someone else has taken it away.
Not very nicely. We're going to be talking about our own top 5 quarterbacks later in the show. Nice little plug.
Sorry to transition there, but I mean,
I mean, it's natural because we're talking about those quarterback contracts. Look, Deshaun Watson a couple of years ago led the league in passing and everything like that. But my concern is, and I've always said this with any quarterback who does this when their team goes 4-12, I need to see them do that when the team wins. I'm not saying any quarterback can just put up, nearly 5,000 yards a season, but when you're constantly losing games and you're behind, you're expected to pass. And there's certain ways teams play defense that, might allow that to happen. So like people will talk about Jameis. I think Jameis Winston can have a great season this year with the Saints, but don't, save me the 30 touchdown, 5,000 yard season. That was not impressive to me because, well, the reason he had a lot of those opportunities to throw more was because he was throwing a lot of interceptions. So I'm hesitant to elevate Deshaun Watson to that level just yet because I need to see him succeed while the team succeeds with the pressure on. Because again, when you can continue to do those things throughout the season when you get late, because by the time the Texans got into November, December, that season was over. Who cares? There's no pressure. You just go out there and perform. Teams expect you to lose. And guess what? If you put up a valiant effort, all right, my stats are good. So that's the impression I got from that Deshaun Watson season. So I want to see that when his team succeeds. So I'm not ready to elevate him, I guess, to that top 5 level just yet. But
to stick on the conversation with Watson, I do think the one reason I wouldn't pick the Browns on this is because cap hit wise, okay, maybe they lose some flexibility. They may come to regret the amount to a certain extent, but I think the rest of the NFL regrets the Watson contract more than the Browns ever will.
Oh yeah.
They've like the Cardinals probably regret that contract more than their own, but when they give it to Murray, because it's totally just set the bar and changed things. So I think for that purpose, the Browns have almost, they've gotten the quarterback. They believe in Watson and they believe it's a quarterback upgrade. You obviously want to do that as an NFL team whenever you can, but I think to a certain extent, they've purposely kind of screwed the rest of the league to a certain extent. They've kind of hamstrung the rest of the team and say, this is now the level the rest of you all have to pay quarterbacks as well. And this is the way it has to be structured, this much guaranteed. So I think that's really strategic. And I think the way this Murray contract signed, that's exactly what the Browns want. So I think they're happy with the way it's gone so far. So I think there may be some other teams I might point to that regret it more.
Right.
Go ahead.
Especially in their own division. I mean, Lamar's, it's such a hard, what kind of yearly salary he's going to command, especially though, such a unique player, such a unique offense, and to have that in your own. I can't imagine what the Ravens are thinking because Lamar's one of those guys that I think is just a unicorn for, kind of today's NFL. So having that in your own division is certainly, like you said, hamstring.
Yeah, and look, I mean that's something too that, again, Lamar Jackson, you would assume is the next guy up. I mean, we're running out of quarterbacks to pay at this point. So Lamar's sitting there thinking like, okay, at the bare minimum, you're getting Kyler Murray's contract because again, Lamar Jackson's a better quarterback than Kyler Murray. Uh, Only two unanimous MVPs in this league, and one of which is the greatest quarterback of all time, and then Lamar Jackson. So he's certainly deserving of a contract worthy of that, certainly worthy of what Kyler Murray got, if not more. And you can even argue that he's more worthy than what Josh Allen got because relative to Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen has probably accomplished less in this league. Now, again, you get to the playoffs and it's a little murky there, but at the same time, you can't discount the MVP and the performance he had that season.
That's basically the one difference, right? Like,
yeah,
and both won playoff games, but it is a difference.
It's a pretty big difference, because it especially the way, I mean, Lamar he was great and he was by far the best player in the league that year. You know what I mean? Like
wire to wire.
Yeah, and
from week one against Miami, right?
Yeah, and look, I'm not going to get into my philosophy on the difference between having the best season and being the best at your position, but Lamar was by far had the best season and was great, like you guys said, wire to wire that year. So again, he's going to get paid. You just hope that it's soon, and again, these guys always take gambles on themselves if they go into a season without a new contract because an injury can change that. And you would think, and at least you would feel like this is going to happen before week one. If not, it's a lot of risk on both sides of the ball. So anyways, we talked about quarterbacks a lot, and we had a lot of wide receiver trades and contracts, but most importantly, the two of the best, if not the two best wide receivers in all of football got traded this offseason. And coincidentally or not, we have the guys that cover both the Packers and the Chiefs on this show. So it kind of works out very nicely that we had this as a topic today. And look, Tyreek Hill goes to Miami with Tua Tagovailoa and the Dolphins and Mike McDaniel and the new look Dolphins. Davante Adams heads over to Las Vegas to play with the Raiders and Josh McDaniels. So first I'll ask you let's put it this way. Let's ask which player do you think is going to, I guess, adapt and have a better season next year? And look, take into account quarterback, take into account division, take into account everything. And I'll start with you, Braden. Who do you think's going to be in the better situation or just have the better season?
Yeah, I think you mentioned the quarterback situation. So two of the last some interesting numbers that stand out to me is his net yards per passing attempt. He had 5.4, 6.13 last year. You look at Derek Carr. He's had, I think, the accuracy perspective, 68.4 or better for his completion percentage last. Something that maybe not a lot of people realize with Derek Carr last year in kind of a breakthrough scene was a lot more accurate. I mean, I think he was the best rated deep passer through the year. And I think he was willing to do that a lot more often, test the defense to their brink. And he had a career high last year in pass attempts with 626. So, I mean, it's no question to me, Derek Carr's way better. And I think over so long that they played together in college at Fresno State, but I think just having that friendship and that chemistry, things that I think Davante Adams and Derek Carr already kind of have in sync and already kind of ready to dish out to opposing defenses that Tua and Tyreek may not even really have, especially with the new offense and the new coach in Miami. So if we're just talking, I think the Josh McDaniels, how he's going to run that offense is very interesting. But at perspective, I think just how they attack defenses, deep versus kind of short. And to me, it's Davante Adams, I think, has a better statistical season, no doubt about it.
Agree or disagree, Kyle?
Yeah, I agree. I think especially when you're quantifying it as like production numbers, catches, yards, touchdowns, basically almost every season they've played side by side, uh, Adams has had the better year. You could even the year that Hill got hurt that season, so they both finished below 1,000 yards. But at his best, Hill's season, he had 1,479 receiving yards on 87 catches in 2018. That's maybe the only season where he could, like, side by side, you could contest he was better. Adams had one extra touchdown, 13-12, and had 111 catches compared to the 87. So, especially the way Adams wins so much with volume, and I think more so than McDaniel's system, I think it's Brady. The first thing you said right away was quarterback, and I think you nailed it completely. Especially not just Carr's efficiency. I think we all agree right now what they've shown in the NFL. Derek Carr's a better quarterback than Tua Tagovailoa. Tagovailoa has the potential to maybe be better. Although I do wonder if that hip injury kind of sapped that potential upside to where his ceiling is basically what Carr is, but that's a debate for a different time. But right now, Carr is done a lot more, proven to be a lot better. But I think he's also the way he targets receivers. He's hyper targeted Darren Waller, Hunter Renfrow during games, sometimes even both. So it's a type of offense where Aaron Rodgers did that with Davante Adams the last few years, and I think that ability to just garner 10 targets a game almost unquestioned. We were worried about Adams leaving Rodgers, but it's almost the perfect quarterback to do it with because Derek Carr is so used to that. He'll lock on to whoever his best target is, and he'll find a way to get them the football. I think if anything, Adams maybe loses in touchdowns. I don't know if he'll get a double-digit touchdown season, but I could see him getting. I mean, he had 169 targets last year. I really think 170 targets is feasible for Derek Carr. Even if you push it back a little bit and say 140, 150, the catch total should still be there. And I think with Hill, it's what's the usage going to be? I mean, he last year he saw a career high in receptions, Braden, but it seemed like the way that the Chiefs used him was a lot different, a lot more underneath. Okay, yards after the catch, which seems like that might be his role with Miami, but that also does kind of sap that upside as well. I don't think he'll get double-digit touchdowns either. So I would still side with Adams for all those reasons.
Yeah,
I will say,
just real quick,
when
he was talking about usage, I mean, it's really interesting too when you already had a lot of catches last year, but not necessarily the yardage to go with this. About those points Kyle made, it's going to be interesting to see if those two are used any differently than one.
Well, I was going to say, Kyle, I think there is still concern with Davante Adams leaving Aaron Rodgers, but not for Davante Adams. And this will kind of transition into what I'm going to ask you next. And, we look at both teams, contenders in each conference, and I think Super Bowl, tier 1 Super Bowl contenders in each conference, obviously, losing their best offensive player outside of their quarterback this offseason. Now, for a couple reasons, I think Green Bay is going to, I don't want to say regret, because again, this seems like a move that Davante Adams wanted. This just wasn't something that Green Bay fumbled for it to happen. So when I say regret, I don't mean that they regret the way they handled things. I just think they're going to regret losing him for the fact that I don't think they adequately replaced him. And, on top of that, not only did they not adequately replace them, last season they finished, I believe, 10th in points per game. So borderline top 10 offense points per game wise. And you just lost a player who in the last 2 seasons had 29 touchdowns and 3,000 yards. That is and look, you don't have to replace every single one of those touchdowns and yards, but in the NFL, when you're borderline a top 10 offense and you're losing that much production from one player that does give you a great advantage, that's going to be hard to replace. And I don't think they did that adequately enough. I think there are obviously certain things with Kansas City that are going to change, and you want to see Mahomes handle that. I think a lot of people anticipate he will. But even they did a good enough job replacing talent, not necessarily Tyreek Hill individually, but through the draft, through free agency, I think they did a far better job than the Packers. So
that includes poaching away Marquez Valdez-Scantling from the Packers, right?
Yes.
Like that if that's the equation. But I mean, what we saw early in Juju Smith-Schuster's career, is it really a downgrade from Hill to Juju? I'm not sure it's that much of a downgrade.
I'll feel safe to answer that question later in the season, because I think Tyreek Hill is a very unique dynamic weapon that, combined with someone like Travis Kelce, two guys that finished in the top 10 again in yards after the catch, that's for two players on one team to do that is pretty darn impressive. I'm not saying it taking anything away from Juju, but right now I'd say there is a clear separation in the two players, even though they're both great individually.
Yeah. And I guess real quick, I can't remember how long his timetable is, but on the Packers, I know Christian Watson did have, I think was it shoulder surgery, Kyle?
Knee. I think it was a knee surgery.
So I mean, it'll be interesting to see how long it'll in this rookie year as well.
Yeah, currently on the PUP list, and I mean, there's no like real fear that he might be on the PUP list to start the season, but there's also nothing to say that that won't be the case either, that he will be removed from the PUP list by the start of the season. So yeah, it could be a month without him. I will say, it seems like, and I mean, Braden, you can answer this in terms of just like the sheer return on what you got from Hill and Adams. I'd say the Packers probably feel at least happy with what they got back in terms of the draft ammunition, because it seems like what we've seen from training camp and through the OTAs, Quay Walker is immediately stepping in as a starting linebacker, even though Chris Barnes has played pretty well. So for them to already, and this was as far back as the early rookie minicamp OTAs, they were pretty convinced that he was going to start from day one, even though, again, Barnes has been pretty good. So it's pretty confident in the rookie's ability, and maybe Wyatt might not start on the defensive line, but that was the other first round pick they got. And the other second round pick they got from the Raiders was used for Watson. So you're right. To talk about that is that's part of the investment they made. It seems like the other rookie, Romeo Doubs, has actually been a lot better. So maybe that's one where they end up being happy with Doubs stepping up. But yeah, certainly I think it's a far cry from what Adams brought to the table. And frankly, even trying to replace Valdez-Scantling, they may not have done that adequately. So yeah, maybe Doubs can kind of replace Valdez-Scantling. That's kind of a realistic goal for any players, let alone a rookie. But yeah, I think at least the return in terms of that, especially that first round pick, I think they feel pretty happy about that. Would you say the same for the Chiefs? So like you're happy with who they selected and those players working out so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think Sky Moore, I think the thing is just, I think his ability to separate, and that's something that, NFL, I think has to be a focal point for incoming wide receivers, and a guy that, was only playing, you hope that kind of just takes off right away. It'll be, I think, for Kansas City, just in terms of the usage, will be where they line guys up. Of course, use a lot of motion, was kind of primarily a slot guy recently in Pittsburgh, and I think that's where a lot of people start now. So which guy kind of gets more slot reps between the two newcomers, for me, is going to be fascinating. And looks like as we're talking here, I can't. Rappaport must have just tweeted Debo Samuel has just signed a massive extension. Don't know if you guys see that alert, those numbers, but a little bit of wee-woo breaking news.
Yeah, well, hey, let's while we're doing it,
soundbite?
Yeah, well, I let me work on that. I first, one thing at a time. I got to add some captions here. No, look, I mean, this is oh, we lost Braden. Maybe he's getting something on the news. There we go. Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, this was.
I don't know if I see any numbers. Here we go.
Let us. I'm just using massive extension to describe this as we react real quick to this.
It looks like 3 years, 1 million, 58. I think is guaranteed number. So pretty.
All right. Well.
Fast.
Well, look, I mean, San Francisco's been in the news for a number of reasons. Obviously, the Debo Samuel trade request earlier this offseason, but of course, the Jimmy G saga, who's still I mean, who would have thought, he'd still be a member of the 49ers at this point? Although I think there is hope that a extension, or I'm sorry, a release or a trade does happen soon now that he's finally throwing. But look, Debo Samuel is a guy that, especially when you're moving to a rookie quarterback or a second-year quarterback in Trey Lance, you want him on this team. There's no way you can justify getting rid of a talent like Debo Samuel. So I'll throw it to you, Kyle, real quick. Your thoughts, instant reaction to this. Debo Samuel signing this big extension. Good for the 49ers? Is it right move?
Every receiver being excited now. It's like, darn, that's one more player the Packers can't trade for. So, I think, pretty good for.
Don't worry. A big segment of New England just shouted out and cried because they had this fantasy of every player that ever becomes available becoming a member of the Patriots. First, it was DK Metcalf.
We heard that in Packers Nation too. Don't worry.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So there's a lot of similarities between the Packers.
Well, and it's these players. They came like in DK, I think, with the quarterback situation, but certainly Debo was demanding a trade, right? Like he. So there was any team, all they have to. He can't even if he doesn't want to go to that team. It basically kind of seemed like, okay, if the team musters up enough draft picks, he just wants out so bad that he'll go to wherever. So any team, I suppose, if they were willing to pay up, could have had that shot. But now that's over. But yeah, I think Debo's last year was the 49ers' best offensive weapon, both running and passing, and probably in both facets. Although Elijah Mitchell's a pretty good runner, as he proved. But and I think that's just it, is that they don't necessarily have to rely on him to do either. He just complements both aspects. And the talk of him running less between the tackles is probably smart, but that's not the only way he runs. He can do a lot outside running, jet sweeps, and those type of motions, or even just getting him involved in the screen game and the pass catching, but after the catch. I think there's lots of creative ways to kind of utilize him. That also makes it difficult for an opponent to just single him out, because he lines up and because he can attack from so many different places. It makes it tough to just say, okay, this is how we're going to defend him, because you have to almost kind of defend him differently play to play.
$58.1 million guaranteed over 3 years.
I mean, yeah. Guaranteed. Oh, sorry. Okay. What was
the
total over 3?
The total was 71.55. Adam Schefter just tweeted about a minute ago. So, again, a massive contract. I mean, Braden, I believe you mentioned it earlier, with the thought that the salary cap now, we're, getting out of the pandemic era of the NFL where everything was sort of frozen. We're seeing what's going to happen with these new TV deals and the amount of money that teams are going to be able to spend. So it seems like they're just willing and able to just shell out these big contracts. And look, I also think it might be partly the Rams effect here. Okay, let's just go for it. Who cares about what happens a few years from now? We can worry about that down the road, because, well, we're going to have more money, more cap room to work with, more flexibility when it comes to trying to get ourselves out of a mess if we end up getting there. But hey, if we win a Super Bowl, why the hell not? So,
well, it's funny because I was full circle back to the quarterback contracts you might regret. I mean, you look at the way Stafford's contract, $49.5 million cap hit in 2024, $50 million in 2025, another almost $50 million in 2026. So those cap hits are pretty massive. You could also maybe rework some of those at certain points, but there's a chance that the Rams might regret the Stafford contract for that 1 or 2 extra years.
Mm-hmm.
But can I just circle back to that? Because there's one other contract that a team might regret, and it's for the opposite reason, because it's not long enough. Do the Cowboys kind of regret the Dak Prescott contract just because they didn't make it long enough? And now, like, even next year, $49.1 million cap hit in 2023. So already it seems like they're having to think about reworking this and getting him a new contract even before next season, just to kind of smooth that over. Maybe get that cap hit down to close to 40 million, if not under that, but extend it over enough of a life cycle, because I think his current contract has still 5 years left on it, but I guess 2 void years, so really just 3 years left.
Well,
but you might want to get that done now to secure the long-term future with Dak, I think.
I mean, we may not know exactly who ultimately has the best contract out of all these big contracts, but I can tell you for sure the most valuable contract in the NFL right now. Can you guys take a guess? It's obviously Tom Brady, and I don't
Yeah.
even think that's arguable because I think he ranks 17th or something on the list of average dollars per year. I mean, I might be exaggerating, but it's about 25 million compared to what we're seeing for some of these quarterbacks. You're sitting there saying like,
He's
I mean,
it's funny. He's 30th in
What?
total salary, like left on the contract because the basically 1 year. But yeah, I think for average, let me look this up. I think he is. I think a little higher than 17th, but it looks like he's in the top 15, but just barely.
yeah, which
like
still,
Garoppolo, Tannehill, Matt Ryan, Carson Wentz, Jared Goff, Kirk
yeah,
Cousins. They all
my
have
point is
higher.
proven.
And I mean, like everyone above the list is, Brady's better than all of them too, right? So it doesn't even really matter.
Well,
Yeah.
again, I mean, you guys might not agree, but we're going to do that in just a second. Yeah, go ahead, Braden.
Oh, I was just you talking where Brady ranks this season. Top 5 cap hits for quarterbacks this year. 3 of the team number 1. Ryan Tannehill at 38.6 million. Kirk Cousins for 1 million, and the Jared Goff from the end of his deal he originally got with the Rams comes 1.15 million. So you got all 3 of those guys making more than fit this year in cap hit. So just kind of some interesting guys there.
Well, and look, I mean, I think we all understand too that dollar value doesn't necessarily mean ability. I mean, it's just a matter of who's up and who's next. And that's how it is. I mean, obviously in some cases, the higher the number it indicates, yes, this is an elite quarterback, but again, Kyler Murray
46.5 average.
Yeah, again, the jury's still out on Murray here. So let's go to the final segment here, and again, folks, breaking news is Debo Samuel signs an extension. He's staying with the 49ers for the next 3 seasons. So that's certainly something that's going to be discussed, I'm sure, quite a bit moving forward, and of course while he's still in San Francisco. So everyone's giving their lists and everyone's talking about top this, top that. So of course we're going to give our top 5 quarterback list to end the show here and kind of go out with a welcome back to Full Press NFL Weekly. So we're each going to give number 5 and then number 4 and so on and so forth, and until we get to the thrilling conclusion that ends with us giving our number 1 quarterback heading into 2022. Anyone who knows me probably knows my answer, but hey, pretend like you're surprised anyways when we get to it. So I'll start with number 5 because, again, I think this is a guy who I think might be a dark horse MVP. I don't know if you want to call it a dark horse MVP candidate, but certainly an MVP candidate at the end of the season. Partly because of his ability, partly because of the team surrounding him, both defensively and offensively, because we know production and wins, that all matters when it comes to MVP. And that's Justin Herbert. He's a guy who, again, he has the arm talent. He has what you think is it when it comes to a quarterback. We've seen flashes of it very early on so far. And look, I mean, he has talent around him to succeed, certainly in this NFL. And I think you're going to see that certainly in that AFC West division. So number 5 for me, and my someone I put money on to win the MVP this year. I'm not necessarily picking him. I'm just saying, hey, if I'm right,
better odds.
Better odds. It's not a bad thing. Justin Herbert. So Kyle, number 5 for you.
It's funny because I think to me the top 4 was pretty easy, but figuring out number 5 is actually pretty tough. I think Herbert's a good candidate. I already hinted at Deshaun, maybe already, in years past, maybe being there, but so much question, so much time off. Can we maintain that? We've already had a segment about Lamar Jackson being a former MVP. I mean, is it that outrageous to think that he's a top 5 quarterback? Matthew Stafford is defending Super Bowl champion, so I think he is his merit there too. But I think I'll say Josh Allen. Maybe project forward a little bit with the Bills, but similar to Lamar Jackson, it's not just the arm, but how you have to defend him. Teams, it is a really difficult, daunting task. And I know we were doing our on the Full Press Packers podcast, our quarterback rankings, like in terms of opposing quarterbacks, and the top 2 were obvious. They play the Bucks, they play the Bills. So for Jesse and myself, my co-host, the 2 best quarterbacks we thought were clearly Brady and Allen. Now I had Brady 1, he had Allen 2. Sorry if that spoils a little bit of the surprise later. But we also put that out to a poll, and I think it was at 63% of people who voted did vote for Allen above Brady. I think also a potential dark, maybe less also a dark horse candidate, because I think he's probably a popular pick for it, but also an MVP candidate in Josh Allen, and how difficult it is to defend him. I think I'll put him at number 5.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with Kyle here. Josh, I think the biggest thing is still got to find the playoff success. See in the big games, the crucial games on the schedule. So I think just proving, I think I need to add a whole lot more to Kyle's. I think defending him, you talk about strongest arm in the league, whatever you want to kind of, whatever you can kind of vary depending on the person. But I think just the strongest arm and the dual threat ability with it's kind of perfect for Buffalo, who predicates on the spacing and the highest percentages of 11 personnel usage the last few years. So within his kind of play style is perfect for that right now.
Well, see, and look, I mean, there has been a nauseating amount of Josh Allen hype this offseason. I think it's gone way over the top to the point of like, all right, guys, let's relax a little bit. You know, you're giving a lot of credit, and at the end of the day, didn't even make it to the championship game. But and I'm guessing now it's very clear that our top 4 is going to be different. I actually do have Josh Allen at number 4, and the reason I have that is because of there is legitimacy to the hype, just not to the level in which that he's gotten and he's received. I mean, you're talking about he's already the best quarterback in the league right now. It's just absurd, and it's not even there's no logic outside of just complete projection to say that that's true. So right now I look at Josh Allen and I say, okay, yeah, I mean, he has the arm strength. He's a bigger running quarterback, a guy that has the ability to withstand some pressure. Like, I worry about guys that are smaller. Kyler Murray, I mean, as quick as he is, I mean, he's a small guy and he continues to put himself out in positions to get hit. He's going to get injured. Josh Allen, I think, more like in the Big Ben mold, and maybe that's his ceiling.
I was thinking Cam,
where
you're almost going to get hurt more tackling him than you're going to hurt him.
Yeah,
as most linebackers.
But I think more so with Ben. Again, a lot of people have the image of Ben Roethlisberger from the last handful of years and his outside problems notwithstanding. When he was elite, he was one hell of a quarterback, and he was a guy that was heavy and that could take a hit, but he could also play, throw the ball very well and everything like that. And maybe Josh Allen is that. Right now, I look at him and I say, okay, he's shown a lot of progression over the next few years. I think it's a safe thing to say that, yeah, he's going to either at the very least stay the same, which I think is already better than a majority of the quarterbacks in this league. So number 4 for me is Josh Allen.
So I guess my number 4 is someone I've considered a top 5 NFL quarterback. I'd say basically his entire career, honestly. Maybe not so much as a rookie, but I mean, it's funny, the Ben Roethlisberger mold, right? You win a Super Bowl in year 2. And I think since then, Wilson, I think probably considered a top 5 quarterback since that 2013 season. And I think it's partially his ability to not only make all the throws, make them all accurately, but also throw not just from inside the pocket well, but outside the pocket probably even better than he does inside the pocket, frankly. So again, back to the point about Josh Allen, how difficult it is to defend him. You can have a perfect defense set up and he can still find a way to make the play. And so I know he was hurt last year, but assuming he recovered, and even towards the end of the year, the last couple games seemed like he was kind of getting something back, a bit better ability to throw. And so assuming that Wilson returns healthy, just as Ian returned to the screen just now, I'm going to continue to maintain Russell Wilson as the QB4, I think. But almost something you were kind of alluding to, Ian, does seem like the top 3 quarterbacks, it's a tier break after them, where you can maybe any of those top 3, you can maybe make an argument for them, any of the 3 of them being the best quarterback, but I think it's a tier break after that. And I would almost argue it almost seemed like a tier, like Wilson in a tier of his own, for me anyway. Maybe I overrate the talent and ability, but I think with Allen compared to everyone else, where you had tons of candidates to be number 5, I think the easiest guy to place on this list to me was Russell Wilson at number 4.
My number 4 is somebody I think a lot of people, just with what I've discussed, it's pretty blasphemous to put this guy above my number 5 quarterback. But I got Joe just from a young quarterback perspective. I don't think there's anybody that makes decision-making quarterback position right now than Joe Burrow. And I think that's something that just separates me, Allen, right now. I know Allen's kind of improved from where he was his early years, but I think not just that, but having the club in his bag, so to speak, to count if he needs to, if the pressure does get to him, or there is a coverage necessarily anticipate. I think Joe Burrow really has kind of all the answers down, and it's just where is this team gonna help or hurt him at? So I'd have been drafted in the last few years. I think Joe Burrow is, to me, head and shoulders above everybody after the confidence, and just I think the decision making, some stuff you can't teach. Other younger quarterbacks don't really possess.
Yeah, I mean, look, I love Joe Burrow, and I think by the end of the season, he can certainly elevate to this group. I'm going to go with Kyle and say that there is. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking, well, I would have these certain tiers. Like, I think there's. Like, I don't want to put so my number 3 quarterback, I think you could probably surmise, is going to be Patrick Mahomes. And I think we're going to, I don't want to say learn a lot about Patrick Mahomes, but I think there's a lot we can learn about who he is as a quarterback this season. Not only with the loss of Tyreek Hill, but you now have a couple not so rosy playoff losses, including the very last game that he played, kind of hanging out there, that you want to kind of get rid of. Travis Kelce is getting a little bit older. You had two, like I mentioned earlier, you have 2 guys that were in the top 10 in yards after catch, that you're not going to get that production again this season. Not to say you can't replicate it through other players, but that we're going to really see if Patrick Mahomes has moved away less from hero ball and more towards, traditional quarterback play. Because I think, look, I feel like, I'll take a quarterback that can throw in the pocket better than, or any day, over a quarterback can throw outside the pocket. I think it's just far more sustainable. I think it's far more consistent, not only for the quarterback itself, but the team around it, because you get a quarterback that scrambles a lot. I mean, you're putting a lot of other players on edge, and there's a lot of mistakes that can happen in this game. So if you master the pocket, I think there's nothing that you can do to get better at the quarterback position. And I think Patrick Mahomes has gotten better at that. Certainly we saw it a lot last year, certainly in the second half. But can he do that all season and get away from what we saw early on, where he was relying a lot on his God-given talents, which is fine and certainly can be used to dig them out of some jams, but you don't want to have that as your focal point. And I think he's started to get away from that. If he can continue to do that, I think we're going to see great progression from him already, and we've already seen quite a bit. So number 3 for me is Patrick Mahomes.
I'm curious to where Braden's going to have this next guy and how his top 3 goes. I wonder if it's going to be 3 different players, or that all 3 of us have. Maybe not, though. Maybe this is definitely not a homer pick. Clearly, I might be the lowest on him, but I've got Aaron Rodgers at number 3. Just because there are some concerning things that have kind of started to trend the last couple of years. Now, the mechanics and the ability to throw might still be the most beautiful thing we've ever seen from a quarterback ever. And that includes Brady, to be fair to Ian. Now, the prettiest thrower isn't always the best thrower, right? And I think that's kind of the distinction. I'm leaning that Brady's at least better than Rodgers based on this ranking. And I think the over-reliance on Adams is concerning. Now, he doesn't have a choice this year but to not rely on him. So how does he spread the ball out to find the open receivers again, as kind of what we really showed in 2019 when Adams was hurt and he was able to kind of not rely on him, and it turned out a really good season. The Packers had tremendous success, a lot of great success on the ground. And I know this offensive line's been a little bit rebuilt, retooled since then. So you've had to kind of rely more on Rodgers the last couple of years. So I wonder if it returns to a more run-heavy approach for the Packers, kind of like it was in 2019, and maybe rely on Rodgers' efficiency, which has always kind of been there through his career, whether it's efficiency with yards or efficiency with touchdowns. Touchdowns especially, because like he's never put up a 5,000-yard season. He's also never had the insane volume. Like I don't think he's ever thrown for 600 attempts in a season. So maybe he's done that once, but I just, so there's nitpicking concerns because we are talking about legit. I think any of these top three could be considered the best quarterback in the NFL. I think by this point we already know who the top three are. We've already named them so many times. But if I'm nitpicking, I'm maybe nitpicking more towards Rodgers. Maybe I've just seen him play so much that Ian, you talked about playoff losses hanging over. And at least Mahomes can kind of say, okay, well, we've won a Super Bowl in the last 3 years, but like how many playoff losses to hang over Rodgers since his last win? And I think that weighs much more heavily, especially the manner of the last playoff loss. You lose in the divisional round to a team that didn't score an offensive touchdown. Like how do you lose that game to a team that can't score on offense? It was an inability to do so yourself on offense. I mean, did they score? I think they did score a touchdown.
But the first drive, it was that first drive, but after that, it was just.
So you see that it seems even longer ago than the rest of the game that I almost forgot about it. But so I've got Rodgers at number 3. Couldn't put him any lower, but almost like Wilson, because I think he's really similar to Wilson, just better version of what Wilson has been through his career. But also easier to put him at 3 than I think the decision between 1 and 2 for me.
I was close. I think I have to go Mahomes at 3 just based off where the mistakes were last season. I think just the overall wire-to-wire season, it was so many mistakes that mental, early on. And then you talk about the playoff loss, not being able to finish that game, playing, a little bit tighter than we've ever seen him play before. So Patrick Mahomes, I think, just had to put him below Rodgers based on how last season went. You talk about what he's trying to do, take what's given to him more. He kind of discussed throwing with a little bit more firmer, and I think the biggest thing is just going to be kind of see how he feel differently. I think there's always been a want to test it vertically time and time, but I think just kind of working a little more methodically is major. So I think just how last season ended, even though the act a little bit more fruitful for Mahomes, I think I have to go with him at 3 because the are so basic, so fundamental, and in turn, I think just the improvement are going to create massive returns if they do indeed happen. So Mahomes at 3.
Yeah, and look, not surprisingly, I have Rodgers at 2. And to kind of piggyback off one of your points, Kyle, you talk about 2019. That's 3 years ago now. And look, I know Brady's doing what Brady's doing, but we can't assume that every player is going to continue to get better as they age. Mm-hmm. I think there's surely enough evidence to suggest that more often than not, the older you get, you might lose a little bit here. So I think you're right. There are some concerns with Rodgers. I couldn't drop him to 3 because I still think that he's, you can't measure certain aspects of the quarterback position. It's just you can't. You can't get inside someone's head and quantify what abilities they have in that sense. But Rodgers is second to 1 when it comes to a lot of that stuff. And I think, no disrespect to Patrick Mahomes, I think partly experience and partly just, regardless of lack of Super Bowl wins, I think the MVPs and just the individual success speaks for itself. So I do give Rodgers the edge in number 2 here. So surprise, surprise. I mean, if there was any suspense as to who I was going to put number 1, well, then stay tuned because we're getting to that.
Yeah, so my number 2 might cause some suspense because I'm going to put Tom Brady at number 2, thinking that.
Oh, did your video just cut out? What happened? Go ahead, Kyle.
And this isn't a career discussion, although I think it probably would be, if it was a career discussion, I would still have Rodgers ahead of Mahomes, right? This is projecting who's going to be the best quarterback today in 2022. And while I think Brady spectacular, and certainly when you say get better with age, I mean the amount of pass attempts he threw last year is insane. No one's ever done that ever. Let alone like there's so many things that Brady has never done. Like no one's done what Brady's done just because of how long he's played. But on any individual season, there's opportunity for any quarterback in theory to throw that many passes. No team, I guess, trusts their quarterback as much as any team should trust Tom Brady. So that's what he gets. But I think the unprecedented nature is what does Brady feel like in terms of like body reaction coming off a season with that much heavy usage? Because we've seen him do all sorts of things, but we've never seen him do that before. So I am slightly concerned as much as you should never be concerned with it, because people have been questioning, doubting that for over a decade now, right? In terms of, you can't keep doing this, but man, that was an insane season just in terms of sheer volume. So I do wonder if there's a drawback in efficiency, not tired arm, because I think he can still sling it as far as he can. He's been able to his whole career, but I do just wonder, coming off that unprecedented nature of volume, if he can still maintain to be the best quarterback. And I'm saying no. So that's kind of my answer. And I also have something to add for, I guess, when we get to my number one, which I thought Ian thinks was going to be a shorter number one session than it is now.
No, I'll add to that when I get to number one. But go ahead, Brendan.
Yeah, number two, Rodgers for me is last season. I was a little surprised he did win MVP. I honestly thought kind of the whole package. I did think Brady edged him just a bit, but he's done, in terms of accolades and MVPs and I think things like that. It may be kind of silly to look at those stats and look at the record. I think just you talked about it's hard to kind of continue doing that as you get older, but I think with Rodgers' years, the production's still been near the top of the top. So it's hard out of those categories. I'm just, like I said, excited to see how he does this year, new pieces. So I think just the biggest reason, like I said earlier, I have him above how he finished last season. But I do still have some of what we saw last year.
Well, I'll and like I said, I mean, I think it looks good for us, Brayden. We're going to agree on our number one, obviously, unless you throw a curveball and say something like, Tua Tagovailoa is number one already. But
Kirk Cousins, you like
Kirk
that?
Cousins, right. I'll say this. I'll agree and disagree with you a little bit, Kyle, to your point about Brady, because I don't, the amount of volume that he threw last year was obviously pretty unprecedented, but he's been regularly at the top of the volume of the number of throws per season. Like, this is nothing new to him. Like, this wasn't an instance where, like, just out of the blue, like, he had 150 more pass attempts than he averages or whatever. So to me,
just one extra game, basically.
Yeah. I think that was part of it. I think Tampa, again, I mean, people are enamored with names like Leonard Fournette, but the reality of it was they were just a poor running team last year. Like, they needed.
Fournette didn't hit 200 carries. And we talk about this amazing season workhorse back. I think he had 180 carries.
He had flashes, and again, people are enamored with the former first overall pick. Oh, it's Leonard Fournette, whatever. But look, this team was successful because they needed Brady's arm. And, I'm not, a few years ago, I would concede that, yeah, you can always, leave a little bit of room for some decline because of age, but I'm done doing that now. At that point, I'm just, it's like, look, the guy's going to be 45 in 3 days. Happy birthday, Tom, if you're listening or watching. I really appreciate it. But, look, the guy
hates me now.
Yeah.
So.
It's like if he's 45 at this point, I'm not anticipating anything. I mean, the guy is who he is. So to me, I look at what the season he had last year, and I agree with Brady, and anyone who listened to me last season knows I was pounding the desk for Brady to be MVP. And I'm not going to sit there and say Aaron Rodgers has a fake MVP. No, look, he won the MVP. I'm not going to pretend like it didn't exist, but I just disagree with it. I thought it was, I thought it was poorly chosen, but that's besides the point. It doesn't change the fact that I thought, and I have felt that Brady has been the best quarterback in the league for quite some time. And this goes back to that
2002?
Well,
2001?
I think indisputably when Peyton Manning retired, because I think there's a good argument that you can say that for a near decade, those two guys were just head and shoulders above everyone else in terms of what they did. And I think you can make a case that they kind of handed that title back and forth for quite some time. I think when Peyton was gone, I mean, obviously the Peyton we knew was gone before he retired. That last season was a lot, but since then it's like, look, Brady's won 3 Super Bowls, been to 4. He's won an MVP. I mean, again, you can argue that he very well should have won the MVP last year. He's outproducing. I mean, it's not just that, but it's not this. This isn't a legacy thing. He's outproducing guys like Patrick Mahomes, who he outproduced last year and the year before. He's outproducing Aaron Rodgers. He's outproducing Josh Allen. And he's doing it. And again, I know a lot of people have turned the corner and called this 2020 Bucks team a super team. But the reality of it is he went to a brand new team, a team that literally had the worst winning percentage in NFL history, hadn't won a playoff game in 13 years, and won a Super Bowl without a training camp. Like that to me just isn't given enough thought. And I'm thinking to myself, like, this guy just has not let that title go. So for me, and this kind of goes back to what I was saying before, do I agree that Lamar Jackson was the best player in 2019? Like the best, the MVP? Yes, I do. Was he the best quarterback? Absolutely not. I mean, that title does not change year to year. That is something that, yes, part of it is history, but it's primarily what we're seeing currently from Brady that gives him that title. Really, I mean, it's more about what he does as opposed to what other quarterbacks do. So if he starts to fall off, then yes, I think that opens the door. I don't care what Josh Allen does. I don't care what Patrick Mahomes does. I don't care what Aaron Rodgers does. If Tom Brady keeps doing what he's doing right now, he's going to be the best quarterback in the league until he decides to hang him up. And very briefly, he did that for 40 days, but then he decided to come back and reclaim his spot at the top. So number one for me is Tom Brady.
Conveniently, Ian didn't have an episode proclaiming who's his number one quarterback without Brady being on the list in that time frame. So
I did open the door for me to concede that potentially guys like Rodgers and Mahomes could ascend to that, but
because Brady's not in the league, it's the ghost of Brady that they're competing against.
Well, look, I mean, this
makes sense.
This isn't blind fandom. This is, I mean, again, I try to come from it from a very logical perspective, and it's like, look, as great as I think Josh Allen is, as great as I think Patrick Mahomes is, in no world can you convince me that they have surpassed him in some of the aspects, like the mental aspect or understanding. Like, they may understand defenses, but not to the level of Tom Brady. Like, they don't have that backlog of information, and not only that, they don't have that ability to process that information as much as Brady does. And yes, old players have that advantage, but not often do old players also maintain the high level of play. Brady has done both. So to me, Mahomes and Allen, they could have this high level of play. They're not going to, when it comes down to it. I mean, are you going to bet against Brady against either of those guys?
And I mean, to your credit, like in terms of like how long he's been the best, like I think even when Manning was around, right? It was the 2014 season. You had the Seahawks team where if they had managed to beat Brady, they're going back to back against probably the two of the top 5 greatest quarterbacks ever. And, you know, we're talking about them as maybe the greatest defense ever. Mm-hmm. And
at least of this era of football.
Well, I mean, like if they had won that game, if they had like back to back, you've beaten Manning and Brady in back-to-back Super Bowls, you might like really start to push them as the greatest defense ever. But he almost changed the course of history and prevented that, right? Like he prevented this Seahawks dynasty from existing, just and like kind of extended the Patriots, right? But also like how badly they beat Manning really showed, man, there is a level difference between these two.
And when Manning was still playing, so in the fourth quarter, like to your point, Kyle,
touchdown drives when he needed them. Yeah,
that was to me that's what not only convinced me that he was the greatest of all time. Like, trust me, I wasn't someone who was, you know, after 3 Super Bowls doing this thing. Like, I've been pretty consistent for the last 20 years or so. Like, this isn't just a current thing. But just then and there, I thought, you know, very clearly he had just played on another level, because that season there was a lot of questions coming into it. Obviously, you know,
the Kansas City game, right?
Well, the
That
Kansas City game, you had 10 years since winning a Super Bowl. But to your point, Kyle, that the disparity in play, not only from the quarterbacks themselves, the teams, but specifically that fourth quarter where Brady had 2 incompletions through 2 touchdowns and was, I mean, you could argue was probably perhaps the best 15 minutes of quarterback play in the history of football because of what he did against that specific defense and what at the time was the greatest comeback in fourth quarter Super Bowl history, only to be surpassed just 2 seasons later by what
was his name? Edward Thomas Patrick Brady.
Like that, yeah.
I can't remember his name. Too many names.
The guy who owns the Brady brand, the overpriced clothing line that I've purchased a few things from. But
that's a great monologue by Ian in terms of the reasons Brady should be number 1, and I'm probably wrong. But again, projecting to what is 2022, who will be the best quarterback? And so really quick, I've already kind of started releasing my projected touchdown series on Full Press Coverage. Just today I released the AFC East episode article, and then look for the AFC North article to come soon. Basically, I have Patrick Mahomes projected to lead the league in passing touchdowns. So just in terms of I think where his abilities at, you've mentioned it. He started to turn the corner already in terms of like making the right decisions, and because he's shown to do it now, it's again back to with Aaron Rodgers. You don't have a choice but to not rely on the speed of Tyreek Hill anymore. I mean, even last year you couldn't really rely on the speed of Tyreek Hill just because of how his role changed so much. So, again, maybe I'm overestimating Juju Smith-Schuster's ability, as we kind of talked about. I was getting maybe a little ahead of myself on his praise, but I also really like what his chances to be able to improve on success that he's had. Maybe not quite the 55 touchdowns he had in 2018, but I think he can recapture what we viewed, I think, especially that 2019 playoff run, beating the Titans defense, beating the 49ers defense, and the way he did them in fourth quarter comebacks. And yeah, there's a long Damian Williams touchdown that really helped against the 49ers. But I think especially there was a lot of plays in both those games where he was making the right throws, and he was kind of, especially the 49ers, that tough pass rush. He couldn't always rely on the deep ball, and he found ways to create drives. So I think he's already shown that to me, where I do believe he's at points been the best quarterback in the NFL at certain times. So I think he recaptures it this year. But again, that's obviously I have 2 people disagreeing with me on here. So we'll find out. Does Braden throw a curveball, or is Brady his number 1 QB?
No. Yeah, Tom Brady for me. I mean, there's not a whole lot to add. Just talking about what we have with some of these guys. You talk about just how to defend these guys, but also I think the coming, what Brady's kind of doing and still stiff arming these other younger quarterbacks away. Still don't know if there's anybody that is more I guess I'd be more confident in down by, 1 score in the final 2 minutes, just because, every play is going to be, going to be kind of thought out perfectly. So Tom, like you guys have said, he's not really fallen off. And I guess it's just going to be, I think this year could be the worst Tampa team that he's had around him. So if he can get another Super Bowl, though it's not going to change his greatest of all time status, but I think just for this last few years, if he can get that this year, number 8, that would be pretty crazy on a team that was losing for so long. So I think the rosters were around again. Mike Evans never had less than 1,000 yards in his career. I think when you got him, at least that's gonna help out enough with this. Maybe a little bit more. Yeah, it's nothing's really changed the last few years as much as some of these guys adore.
Julio Jones is going to find the fountain of youth and go back to 2016.
but even with Evans, he's put up career high in touchdowns each of the last 2 years, 13 and then 14. Does he put up 15 this year? Like he just continues to have that ability red zone wise. It seems like that connection of scoring efficiency. You need to turn those field goal drives into touchdowns. Seems like the Brady Evans connection is really strong with that. And you could have probably the most faith in this offense. In any aspect, it's probably that. And just how efficient they're going to be at scoring touchdowns.
Yeah, and look, part of it too is how healthy, again, I mean, don't expect Julio Jones to be Julio Jones, but if he can give you 400 or 500 yards and 4-5 touchdowns, that's not a bad that's kind of Gronk offensive production, although he doesn't replace what Gronk does altogether because of all the things he does as a tight end and whatnot. So
yeah. And thoughts go out to Ryan Jennings, and of course, I mean they already lost two. That's such a kind of hardworking guy at a position that doesn't get a lot of love. So confirmed really yet what the injury is, but kind of some not so good thoughts are with him right now for sure.
Yeah, and look, I mean, the center quarterback relationship, he's started every game since he's been drafted, I believe, by the Bucs. So that's going to be a big loss for them. But we're going to say goodbye for the night. We've been on here for an hour and 15 minutes, as surprisingly as that sounds. It actually doesn't feel like it, but we've covered quite a bit on the show today. We look forward to doing it all season. So thank you very much for tuning in. Give us a follow on Twitter at FullPressNFL. Go over to FullPressCoverage.com. And of course, if you're a hockey fan, go over to FullPressHockey.com because there's a lot of great stuff going on over there. So have a great night, folks. Have a great Sunday and get ready. Tomorrow is August and football is just around the corner.